Hey friends, thanks for tuning in. This week we get to have a conversation with Will Woodson, who's an amazing pipe maker, player, as well as flute player, and wax cylinder aficionado, we learn in the interview, and lots of other things. Very cool person with a lovely voice, by the way. You ever need something else to do, Will, feel free to record some audiobooks. I would listen. We talk a lot about and get some samples from a semi-recent album that he did with Caitlin Finley and Chris Stevens. Oh, and some guest appearances too from Jackie O'Reilly, called The Glory Reel. Really great album. I'd suggest checking it out if you haven't already. There are links in the show notes. We got some samples throughout, and I'm gonna give a copy of it away to one of the show supporters over on Patreon/Jim, who mails in a check. Thanks, Jim. So here I got my little Cthulhu dice tower. I got a D12 is what we need right now. Let me double check this. Yeah, that's right. So I've got everybody, all the patrons, all the supporters set up right now. I got Alec will be number 1, John Charles number 2, Rod number 3, Carol number 4, Sarah number 5, Andrew number 6, Bradley number 7, Alan number 8, Jeremy number 9, JD number 10, Camille number 11. I got Jim on here for number 12. Got a D12. Let's see what Cthulhu says. Number 12, Jim. I will be reaching out to you, getting you a copy of this album right away. And enjoy the interview, everybody. And thanks again for tuning in, and have a great time. Bye-bye. This first track on the Glory Reel is a it feels like a good one for me personally to ask you like an initial question here, because here's the thing. As of, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, if I'd seen your face, I would have thought you were Nate Banton.
Right.
Because I was familiar with you because of a lot of YouTube videos that I watched rather a lot of you playing like 5-drone small pipes and border pipes with a contrabass and stuff like that that are on Nate Banton's YouTube channel. And so now I'm hearing you on this album playing flute. Hey, hang on a sec. This isn't Nate Banton, and also he's a killer flute player. Well, like, what is also, by the way, like, this is a complete tangent, Will, but I typed flautist into my show notes the way that I thought it was going to be spelled, but it autocorrected to flutist. Am I just using archaic spelling, or is that just my ignorance, or what's going on there?
I've never been too sure about the whole thing, because Irish flute players, well, you heard it just there. We tend to use the term, or avoid the term altogether, and just refer to flute players as flute players. I think 100 years ago, I recall looking this up, and I think flautist comes from some sort of late 19th century poetical talk. You know what I mean?
Feels like it would fit there. Yeah.
And flutist is like maybe a more direct modern term. But yeah, Irish musicians, I think, are much too down home for the whole affair and just tend to call each other flute players,
Okay, now that we've gone off on that tangent, I got another one I want you to clear up for me if you're willing, Will.
Sure.
I've never, even after decades of playing, I never feel comfortable with how I'm referring to bellows. I have one. Is it a set of bellows, or do I have a bellow, right, that goes under my elbow? Does anybody know? Is this figured out?
I think it's I always refer to bellows in the as such in the plural. I just got a new bellows I never call them a set of bellows. It's always I just got a new bellows
Mm-hmm.
from so and so, or like, yeah, my bellows is leaking, or my bellows are leaking, I suppose. Uh, my friend Jim Wynnum, who's lives in Ireland, but is from England originally. He's a great pipe maker over there, and a friend of mine, Jim, has been known to refer to them as bellowses. Which I have an awful
Bellows
fondness
is.
for Bellowses, but I've
It's
never
even better.
been able to pull it off myself.
It's like
I don't
just
think I have
take
the
it even
accent
further.
for it. Yeah,
Blast it out of the water. Bellows is.
yeah.
That's great.
But yeah, I call them bellows, anyways.
Okay, well now that I'll just follow your lead. I consider
Hmm.
you an authority. So now that the important like technical stuff is out of the way, now let's get back to this question I had about fluting. Like, how does this figure into you as a musician? Like, was it flute? Am I asking you a chicken or egg question? Really? If I say, was it flute first, whistle first, pipes first?
It was
What leads
it
to
was
what?
yeah. I mean, it was all at the same time,
Mm.
really. I started out like mini do playing with a local pipe band, but was getting on to tin whistle and at the same time, and then got into wooden flute a few
Now,
years later.
another misconception that I have to clear up in my own like orientation of the world is I had some awareness about Banton pipes and your playing and stuff happening in Portland, but I'm from the western half of the U.S., so I was
Hmm.
assuming Oregon. But I now think that probably wasn't right. Right? When you say local
No.
pipe band, you're a New Englander, right?
Yeah. I live in Portland, Maine. Lived all over before I wound up here. But yeah, the family roots are in New Hampshire originally.
Gotcha.
And people in my family from around Boston and that sort of thing.
And was that the location for that local pipe band? Was it in New Hampshire?
Actually, the local pipe bands. I spent some of my time growing up living in Orlando, Florida, of all places.
Oh, gotcha.
So yeah, I got my start musically with a pipe band down there called Rosie O'Grady's Highlanders, which
Oh,
is a
really?
terrific contradiction of terms.
What a great name too,
Yeah,
though.
so it was really your kind of classic, Irish American pipe bands,
Yeah.
a lot of great people involved with it, and had a great time playing with them when I was a little kid.
Hmm.
And yeah, got I suppose that really like kind of got my first start in music, um, that away. But at the same time was getting a hold of tin whistles and starting to
Hmm.
figure out stuff on that instrument, and then got onto the flute a few years later.
Were those teenager years, or was this college time? What kind of?
Teenager years, yeah. I would have
Yeah.
started on the pipes and the whistle sometime around age 10.
Mm.
Um, and I think the flute I got onto when I was 14 or 15.
Was there any was that in part like school band kind of like silver flute kind of thing, or was it always trad stuff kind
It
of
was
on?
yeah, it was always traditional music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I never had any interest in at first I didn't even think that I liked flute really. And certainly kind of the more classical flute wouldn't have spoken to me at all. I think it wasn't until I heard recordings of flute being played like in a kind of more aggressive, I suppose, rhythmic
Mm.
style,
Interesting you say that.
that I got interested in
Yeah.
actually playing the flute. Yeah.
This might just speak to my own unevolved nature, Will. So you don't have to join me in admitting something that's not true about yourself. But I know that for me as a teenager, flute was for girls, and
Dude,
so I played tin whistle, but I wouldn't have ever played the flute when I was a teenager.
yeah. No, I've talked about this with loads of friends of mine. It's such a funny thing, like the difference between how flute is perceived in Ireland and versus America.
Mm,
Outside of the traditional Irish music
yeah.
scene in America, like you know. and obviously I don't agree with this at all, but like, going back generations in traditional Irish music, flute was very much, considered a man's instrument, the old guys, would be saying, women didn't have enough wind to blow the flute and that sort of thing, which obviously is complete nonsense. But, there was like very much this, perception of the flute being like this macho, man's instrument, and then like you go back a century and you see women in Irish music playing fiddle, playing concertina and accordion, a few of them playing pipes, but you almost never hear of a woman playing flute. So yeah, it's this very masculine thing. And then like you come over here and I mean I'm 35. I don't know how old you are, but certainly at the time I was growing. Yeah. At the time I was a kid. No, like flute was definitely thought of as something that only girls played. Right. So no, I was keeping the flute playing well hidden at school. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too that like certainly at that age, I was like, if somebody had said Irish flute, the image that would have come to my mind would have been Matt Malloy from the Chieftains.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But in spite of that, still, I would have, definitely been like, no, that's for girls. But I love that you mentioned that you heard that more aggressive rhythmic style, because so all of this this is also self-serving. Here's the thing, Will. I'm reckoning with the fact that everything I ever do in life ultimately really is just very selfish, very self-serving. I might try to convince myself that I have altruistic or community-minded goals, but really it's all for me. I just recently ordered a flute because I got together with some other small pipers here locally, and we all kind of brought whistles and stuff like that too. It was kind of a show and tell kind of thing, try each other's instruments out and stuff, and there were some flutes there. And I'd been flute curious for a while, right? I really like playing whistles, but since getting older and such that I'm no longer worried about perceived gender norms, right?
Right.
I have been interested in flute, but very much feeling intimidated by the idea of getting sound to come out without a fipple. I had a Peruvian friend who was really good on the quena. Are you familiar with that one? It's kind of like a whistle. Yeah, without a mouthpiece. And I tried that for a little bit and could never get sound to come out of it. And so this gathering, one of the flutes there was a wooden flute. And I thought, well, I'll pick it up and blow on it, see what happened. And noise came right out of it. It was not, now I'm not trying to say it's easy, right? But I'm just saying I was surprised that I could get noise out of it, right?
Yeah.
And so like more than ever before, I've really been paying close attention to flute players, and not to make you feel awkward, but especially yourself. I've been looking at a lot of YouTube videos of you playing, and I love that style of play, which I'm such an outsider to flute playing, really, like never having paid close attention to it, that I don't know to what degree what I'm hearing from you is a Will Woodsonism, right? Or typical of the genre. But track 4 on that same album, it was what was the title of that one?
I recorded this album in 2019. I have to pull it up myself.
Right,
track 4. Oh yeah, the Flood on the Holm. Yeah.
I feel like it's a really great example of what you're saying, that really rhythmic sort of driving, powerful flute playing. That I love that sound, man. That is cool. So maybe, I don't know, I feel like I've been monologuing now for too long, Will. Tell me about that style of play, where you first encountered it, why you like it, how you do it, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's certainly I didn't invent it, and I think my own efforts are simply me trying to kind of emulate my own musical heroes. The my own how I came to that style of flute playing myself was initially. I mean, I have to be honest. Initially, it was encountering recordings of a flute player named Harry Bradley, who is a fella originally from Belfast, and he I think when his first album come out, it was the early aughts anyway. So these albums were coming out when I was of I'd be in my teens now. I was of a prime age to kind of hear his playing, and it left a deep imprint on me. And Harry, I think, was at the forefront of certainly not a revival of this style of playing, because there were loads of players in Ireland playing like this, but maybe putting this style of more rhythmic playing in a recorded context and putting it kind of on a pillar. Harry's very much a virtuoso, but instead of going in the direction that a lot of flute players were going at the time, which is to say, emulating Matt Malloy, who left, is a genius flute player and has really changed the landscape of Irish flute playing. Harry went in a very different direction, and as his own kind of stylistic heroes went, kind of has studied a great bunch of flute players from older generations who played in a very rhythmic style. And of course, Harry was coming out of the scene in around Belfast and around the North in general, where there are a whole bunch of flute players, most of whom play to a greater or lesser extent in a very kind of rhythmic, aggressive musical style.
Did you like this is just thinking about how we're about the same age and stuff, did you happen to see, I feel like this was like not the earliest days of YouTube, but still kind of early-ish YouTube, like when the viral video was still kind of a new concept, a beatboxing flute player?
No, I think that one totally went past me. No.
Well. Something to look up later then. Never mind.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah. So yeah, so I was hearing these albums when I was, in my teens, and I think that was my jumping off point for realizing that you could play flute in that sort of style. And as I've as time went on, I studied Irish music more and more, and got out into the world, started going to sessions and that kind of thing. That style of playing that you hear in my own music is really like it is a huge part of traditional Irish music and traditional Irish flute playing that's maybe a bit, even still this day, maybe a bit overlooked simply because of the dominance of the more kind of flowy, I suppose like more melodically oriented style that Matt Malloy popularized. But the older generations of flute players in Ireland, like there's just most of the examples you hear of them playing are in this more rhythmic, percussive kind of dance-oriented style.
Yeah.
And in more recent years, maybe in the past decade or so of my own musical work, I've gotten very interested in I mean, I suppose you could almost call it Irish American music, but in the generation of Irish musicians who immigrated to America and recorded in the 78 era, in the 1920s and 1930s in New York City. And the flute players of that era, really without exception, as far as my own knowledge is concerned, were playing in a very, very rhythmic style, without, it's almost a world apart from a lot of the conclusions that modern flute players have come to. So that's where a lot of my own music comes from these days. And, going full circle, like Harry Bradley was going exactly to those same sources for a lot of his own inspiration when he was recording these albums in the early aughts. I mean, not to speak for him, but I've heard him. I know he admires flute players like John McKenna and James Morrison and fellas like that, who were guys over here recording in the 20s. And of course, they were coming from a whole school of North Connacht flute playing that is still, like, in that locality, is going strong to this day. Like, great rhythmic flute players, great flute players in general from that area who've really kept that tradition alive.
Well, I love that sound, and that with, like, trying to balance both things on your side. Like, I'm not trying to say like that you, like let's see, I get too much inside my head with this, Will. I really like the sound. What I'm trying to say is that I fully recognize that part of that is that in many ways I'm a newcomer to this whole thing, in spite of being like adjacent to it for most of my life, being like lots of listening and playing along with trad music, but never really paying much attention to the flutes, but also, like, for me at least, no, you're my reference for this style of playing. So I don't want to make you feel nervous about the next time you put out an album and think, if I don't do this right, it'll screw people up because they're looking to me, But I just, thanks for doing it because I like it, and I wouldn't have noticed it if it hadn't been for your playing. And I would say too that, like, that Daymark EP that you did, there's I mean, you do this all over the place, of course, but the Wild Irishman in that one, do you remember that track? I thought that was a killer example of, like, some really cool rhythmic flute playing as well.
Send you a list of other flute players so you have a wider source than just me. But
no, I'm good with just the collected works of Will Woodson. But you mentioned that you mentioned the Irish American thing, and that is something I wanted to ask you about, because again, I'm quite ignorant of this whole thing, right? And back on the Glory Reel album, you had one set that it ends with was it Blackberry Blossom, I think? Sure,
yeah.
And I did, of course, that one stood out to me, like, just looking at the track list, I was like, oh, a bluegrass classic, and it did make me wonder. So here's the thing: on the one hand, I have looked at that book, Wayfaring Strangers, that talks about sort of the transatlantic trade of music, and so like I'm aware that what I think of as a bluegrass classic might actually have roots in the British Isles, whereas for me it feels very Appalachian. But I did want to ask you, like, is that an example of the Irish American? Is that the American of Irish American music in a like an overstated, obvious way, or is that something off about my perception of it?
That's an interesting question. I think that there's two, and I know the book you mean, The Wayfaring Strangers. There's kind of it is, but of an earlier era.
Interesting.
If you know what I mean.
It's not the 20s and 30s that you're talking about referencing.
Exactly. There is that. There obviously, American music, and if you're talking about styles like old time music or bluegrass music, that we think of as being uniquely American products, which I suppose they are. They're coming from that kind of melting pot of all sorts of different cultures and ethnicities melding together in rural areas for the most part, if my understanding of it is correct. I'm no expert,
That fits my mental picture, at least.
Yeah. But I think you're talking about it's a story of people coming from other places and essentially in rural areas, like essentially like over a generation or a few generations, losing that identity and gradually, becoming American.
Right.
Whereas I think the when I talk about the Irish American tradition that I'm referencing is a more recent one and an urban one. I'm talking about Irish people immigrating to America in the post-famine era, to places like Chicago and New York and Boston.
Well, that makes sense. Like listening to your album, I don't know if I've got my time. I forget when it was that Prohibition was on, but when I listen to the bluegrass music, I'm thinking of the Smoky Mountains, right? But when I'm listening to the Glory Reel, my imagination is in a speakeasy.
Right. Yeah.
Is that about right?
Which is the context. I mean, like we are talking about the 20s, which is exactly when Prohibition was going on. The 20s and 30s, and it's in a tradition that it really does continue on to this day. Most of my own musical studies of that stuff are secondhand because we don't really have. We're not there. There is an Irish American piping tradition. There's an Irish American flute playing tradition, but it hasn't been carried on with quite the same strength as the Irish American fiddle tradition, where in New York City you have musicians who can trace a line of tuition going all the way back to Michael Coleman, like literally an unbroken chain of musical transmission in terms of people studying with people. And my musical partner and my life partner, Kate Finley, is part of that, is part of that story. She was taking lessons, from a fellow named Brian Conway, and Rose Flanagan, who's Brian's sister, great fiddle players of them both who teach.
I feel
great
sure
musicians.
that I've heard both of those names, but the surnames both sound very familiar.
Yeah. They're famous Irish American fiddlers. And they've taught a bunch of students in the New York region. And Brian was a student and a great friend of Andy McGann, who in turn was a student and really the leading protege of Michael Coleman himself. So there you have a century plus now of a regional Irish American style. And I think, sorry, go on.
No, carry on. Yeah.
I just think it's a thing that can kind of get it, particularly in this era. It's a thing that can get overlooked a bit simply because, and I think probably rightfully so. So many Americans, particularly so many Americans outside of the kind of the Northeast, the little corridor we have from D.C. up to Boston, naturally kind of look to Ireland as a source of authenticity and assume that anything they're getting in America must be kind of secondhand.
Yeah.
But I think it's an overlooked thing that we do have our own thing going on over here, and I'd leave it to other people to decide whether it's bad or good. But I don't think you simply can't argue the fact that we do have our own kind of tradition. So well, I think that's what I mean when I say Irish American music.
That's exactly what I wanted to know, because it's like, and again, this a lot of this is like my own ignorance kind of like being revealed, and then me like realizing like, oh, there are other worlds I had not even considered, But like the question might be something like, if you're an Irish American music musician and you make an album like the Glory Reel, right? Then and I'm speaking like very broad brush here, right? And this is like more like presenting the questions that the ignorant me would be asking, right? Mm-hmm. Is the goal to sound Irish? If not, is the goal to sound American, right? Well, in these like simplistic terms, it's like, well, Irish means like of a certain time period across the ocean, and American means of a different time period on this side of the ocean. And so then to say Irish American, it's like, whoa, what are the defining characteristics of that genre? It's its own thing. And like you say, is there a perception out there that it's second rate? It's like, well, if you can't be genuine Irish music, then you're only Irish American music. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I think that. I'm just saying like.
Yeah. I think. I mean, I think that gets into. I mean, that really gets into. I don't know that I've encountered a lot of people thinking that. That kind of Irish American tradition is second rate or anything like that. I think, I mean, universally, well, I don't know, I'd say universally, but it's pretty inarguable that, particularly the fiddling tradition, Michael Coleman and Paddy Kaloran and James Morrison, that these musicians were the absolute just geniuses on their instruments, and left a massive footprint in the tradition, of course in America, but also back home in Ireland. So I think us musicians over here who are kind of treating them as the holy grail, if anything, we might be seen as a bit old-fashioned. But I've not encountered people thinking that what the kind of the tack that we're on would be second rate or something like that. Not anyone with any kind of understanding of the tradition. Anyways, you might you meet all sort of people going around to gigs, who might not know too much about Irish music.
But there's that what's that poem that's like drink deeply or not at all, because knowing a little bit is the most dangerous thing, right?
Yeah.
If you know a little bit about the musical genre, then you might consider yourself an authority, and then you'd walk up to Will Woodson and tell him he was doing it wrong.
I really do run into very little of that.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. If people are thinking those things, I suppose they're at least keeping it to themselves.
They're keeping it to themselves.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, and to some degree, honestly, it's an admirable answer to what was a very not very specific question. Anyway, we're speaking jazz here. I was just laying down a few bars, and you responded. That's great. The journey that you've taken up to this point in your music, Maybe take me back a little further too. Like, were you taking piano lessons before you hopped into pipe band? And how the heck did pipe band happen? Did you have parents or siblings who played pipes or drums, or like when did you first encounter bagpipes, and why did you think I want to play that?
That's a great question. And I was young enough at the time that I think the memory is a bit fuzzy. No, I didn't really have any musical education prior to the pipes and the tin whistle. My family is Irish American, but neither of my parents played any music. My great grandmother played fiddle. And she was still alive when I was a kid. She wasn't playing fiddle anymore, but I think there was that kind of, it's the sort of thing where my mom, like it's abstracted a bit. Like my mom remembers going to dances when she was a little girl and, dancing waltzes, and that sort of thing. While my great grandmother played. But my grandmother wasn't a musician. My mother was a musician, but she didn't play, traditional music at all. So by the time that I got around to it, this is kind of just like, notional, almost ancestral memory, except that my Grammy White was, still knocking around in her 90s.
Yeah. But it's like, the family had retained a kind of imprint of music, even though,
exactly. Yeah.
I see.
So I wonder if that had to do with it. The local pipe band practice about 2 blocks from my house.
So you couldn't help but hear them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it wasn't much just, walk down the door and start, or walk down the block and start poking around,
Mm-hmm.
and they were a nice bunch of people. And I think my parents were just happy to have me out of the house,
Yeah.
So I think I got started that way.
And was
there were
they kind of a street band kind of thing, or were you doing
exactly
competition? Gotcha.
We did compete, but it was, what was it now? Was it grade 4? Was it?
Probably. They might have started at grade 5 while you're there, but
it might have been.
That's about the time when grade 5 was getting developed, so it might have still been grade
Right.
4, or maybe grade 4B or something like that.
Yeah. And like, good God, man, we were in Florida.
Right. Yeah.
Not to talk down on the great people of Florida. I'm sure the piping scene's come on a bunch, but geez, I mean, I wasn't there too long either. Anyways,
it's not known as like the hotbed of North American piping, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think my parents would have had a bit of Irish music on around the house. The chieftains and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So I think, I was a young kid, so I think just I was interested in that sound, and I think hearing the pipes and knowing that they were that close to me, it was just a very natural first step. And like, I think it's always a bit of a like it's pipe. I think in traditional Irish music, Highland pipers and pipe bands can get a bit of a bad rap, and for reasons like
for reasons you don't say good reasons or bad reasons, but for reasons.
I mean, I've been myself running a session around St. Patrick's Day, and all of a sudden a pipe band comes in through the door of the pub and thinks that they're God's gift to music.
We are,
and you get to listen to someone massacre Danny Boy for 5 minutes straight.
The thing, if you play loud enough, you can't hear anybody say anything against you, so it's pretty easy to just go about feeling pretty darn happy. And
yeah, but I understand that side of the thing. At the same time, like flipping it around, like it's an Irish American institution, and it's relatively affordable. It's relatively democratic. Like myself, a kid interested in this stuff, like I could start getting a hand around playing marches and jigs and reels and that kind of thing. By what did a practice chanter cost in 1998? Like
right, yeah, you get one less than $40 if you wanted to, right? Go to the Scottish Festival and pick one up.
It's nearly as affordable as a tin whistle, And in a lot of places in the country where you might not, really be able to just like go down to your local session. You understand why so many people get into it, and why half as many people get out of it later on in life.
It's
Um,
true.
yeah, but I think that's how it started, anyways.
Was there anybody in the pipe band there who was encouraging you to also pick up whistle, or was that independent?
I recall that being largely independent.
Yeah.
I think I think when people knew I was doing it, they were encouraging about it and thought it was cool. But there was not. I don't recall a lot. In some places in this country, you would see um, musicians involved in the local pipe band who also were involved in traditional Irish music in places like Chicago and that.
Mm.
Boston. Uh, but no, there was no one down there who was doing both things.
So how long were you playing whistle by yourself before you found somebody like a session or something?
Most of my teens, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't really until I was back up here that I started running into sessions again.
Mm.
Which really is makes an argument for the amount of work you can get done with recordings and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel increasingly lucky when I look back that I had an uncle who lived with me most of my childhood, and I don't know if it was self-consciousness on his part or what, but he always like he aspired to be a children's book illustrator, but he
Hmm.
felt self-conscious, I think, about checking out stacks and stacks of children's books from the library to kind of look at. So he'd take my siblings and I to the library so we'd check out books for him. And same interest in animation. He loved the Batman cartoon that was on when we were
Hmm.
kids,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he didn't want to watch it by himself, even if it was just him in the basement. Like he felt self conscious about watching
Sure.
a
Yeah,
kid's
yeah,
show,
yeah.
so he'd get me from school early so we could go home and watch Batman.
Man, what a great
And
uncle.
he was a cool uncle. And in a similar way, like when he wanted to learn harmonica, he didn't buy himself one; he bought two so that I would
Right.
learn with him, right? And same with
Yeah.
the whistle. He bought two whistles, and he and I sat down and learned whistle together. And so like I never had to be alone. But
Right. Yeah,
it
yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
have to be a bad thing to play alone, of course. But I do imagine, like, did you feel reasonably confident or at least comfortable coming into playing with other people, or had years of isolation play make you feel maybe like worried about, oh, I'm self-taught, I'm a country bumpkin coming into the big city kind of thing, musically speaking, you know?
Yeah, I think it's funny to think about it, but I think I do remember being anxious about it at first.
Yeah.
And I was young, this was in my um, uh, uh, what was it now? Like I think like late teens,
Yeah.
really when I first started playing out. Um, but then the same thing goes for a lot of kids. Like um, it's unless you're lucky enough to grow up. Like my partner Kate, she grew up in Philadelphia, and she was part of a musical project there called The Next Generation, which was
Mm.
running out of the Phillies Irish Center. And so she was going on Saturday mornings to be taught alongside a bunch of other kids, learning how to play music socially with them, learning how to perform a bit with them. So by the time that she was, old enough to start going out to pubs and that kind of thing, that was already old hat for her.
Mm.
But yeah, if you're a weirdo like me who gets it, has to kind of figure it out on their own a bit, in isolation to an extent. Yeah, I think there is a bit of a bit of a hump to get over, just in terms of uh, figuring out how to play socially and play with other people, and then figuring out, kind of like learning music off of albums is great. But it wouldn't necessarily give you the same kind of well-rounded session repertoire
Mm.
um,
Mm.
that you get if you're just going down to your local every week, and picking up the tunes that way. And that was really the job for me when I got into my teens and early 20s, kind of
Mm.
picking up a bunch of tunes at sessions and making up for lost time.
So then So I'm kind of like building the timeline in my mind as far as the musical instruments go as your collection grows, right? So we've got pipes and whistles. Where did the like the Banton work come in? Where did the small pipes and even the uilleann pipes and the and other kinds of pipes start coming in to your possession and play?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So let's see now. I moved to Glasgow for a couple of years.
That's cool.
I was living in Scotland. And I moved there. I wanted to, I just needed to, I was a young man and knew that I wanted to be in, all of my hubris and foolishness, knew that I wanted to be in, music for a living and traditional music for a living.
I don't know about other trad musicians, but I know that at least amongst us North American pipers in general, if you've gone to the Holy Land and spent time over there in Scotland, you come back with a certain aura all about you. Like we just assume that you know what you're talking about, and we can almost smell it by proximity. Like just get up close to you, and our playing will get better. So you made the right choice, as far as I know.
It's a funny little thing. So I don't know. I don't know. If I was in my right mind, I would have been going to Limerick. To study Irish music there. But I think at that time in my life, I was in my early 20s. I was still I had quit playing Highland pipes at that time, but was still playing border pipes. I was playing loads of flute, but was playing border pipes, and I already had one foot out the door, but wasn't really ready. I at that time I did not know how easy it was to learn other instruments if you already played music, particularly if you're talking about the difference between whistles and flutes and pipes and that kind of thing. And I think I was thinking, I already have all this time invested. What would I be doing? Giving up Scottish pipes at my advanced age of 21.
Can't start all over with something
exactly
small pipes now. So
yeah, and at that point I still had a lot to learn about music in general, but I'd done enough listening that I was aware of a lot of the music. And this is going back to Harry Bradley, who I'd been listening to in my teens. That musical tradition coming out of the north of Ireland it's inflected with elements of Scottish music, not directly, but which is to say, like it's not inflected with modern Scottish music, but historically, particularly with people from the northwest, from County Donegal, particularly going from Donegal to Scotland for seasonal labor. And there's a great fiddle tradition in Donegal, and musicians would go to Scotland and pick up tunes there and go back to their own localities and kind of took elements of Scottish music, infused them with their own regional tradition into this like incredibly elaborate, just gorgeous, powerful musical tradition. And Highland piping was actually a small part of that. And a lot, their repertoire, much more than the rest of Ireland, is made up of. All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that, man. We just completely lost internet here. I have no idea what happened. I reset the router, and we seem to be up and running again.
Everything sounds great now. Yeah, that's no problem. And really, honestly, I'm just relieved. I just stood that old computer I was telling you about up on its side and pointed a fan at it in case it was like heat or something.
No, it wasn't you. Kate was in the other room, and she completely lost service too.
Gotcha.
Which would be the timing. Like it
would be right.
I teach on this thing.
Yeah, and she's probably teaching right now too. Huh?
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, that never happens here. I don't know what the story is. Anyway, sorry about that.
Well, no
Happy to pick up
problem,
where we
man.
left off.
Yeah, so you were in Scotland when I lost audio.
Right.
Not Limerick. Would have thought to go to Limerick if you'd thought of it, but hadn't thought of it, so you headed to Glasgow instead.
Yep. And yeah, I think I was saying that I went there because I for loads of reasons. One, it wasn't too far away from Belfast, which is where a lot of my flute playing heroes are from. The ones living, anyways.
Right.
And as well. The relationship between the music of Donegal and Scotland.
Yes.
And the role of the small but present role of Highland pipes or war pipes in the music of that county.
That's
that region.
there's another term that I've heard and even used for decades and never been 100% sure that I was talking about Highland pipes when I said war pipes. So
yeah,
thanks for clearing all these up for me today, Will. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Same thing, really. I think it's really a term that comes out of the Gaelic revival, I think, in Ireland. And was a way. I mean, obviously the what we today call the Highland pipes obviously are a indigenous instrument of both Ireland and Scotland, but I think was a way to kind of nativize the instrument without calling it the Highland pipes, which has obvious Scottish associations.
Speaking of having like a small sampling of familiarity and assuming that means you're an absolute expert, I had a lovely coworker, very nice person, who took her dream trip to Ireland a few years ago, and I was so happy for her. And I couldn't help ask, did you hear any good music while you were over there? Maybe any pipe bands? Because she knew I played bagpipes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she very sweetly informed me that, hey, sweetie, Jim, they don't really do bagpipes in Ireland. That's I'm like, oh, my mistake. Never mind. I'll just leave it at that. Because I'm a non-confrontational kind of person, so I just backed away from the conversation.
Yeah, and discretion being the better part of valor and all that. Yeah. Wise move. I would have done very much the same. So yeah, that's why I wound up there, anyways. And they all the people around the Glasgow scene knew me as the nutty American who moved to Scotland to play Irish music. Which in fairness to them, it was a fairly nutty move. But there's a great traditional music scene in Glasgow in general.
Oh, certainly, it's got to be.
And there actually is again, I think hugely overlooked traditional Irish music scene. That there are massive amounts of Irish immigration to Glasgow, and a number of great musicians who live there, and a number of great uilleann pipers actually. The Friel family lives there, and Sheila Friel is a great uilleann piper. I knew her when I lived there. Jarlath Henderson, a fantastic uilleann piper who again lives in Glasgow, or was living in Glasgow when I was there. Anyways, I assume he's still there. I haven't talked to him in a number of years now. But Jarlath's a really nice guy and was very kind to me when I was over there. So I think it was actually living over there that I first got the notion that I might actually be able to take on the uilleann pipes. And my time in, basically my visa was running out in Scotland.
Did they ever issue like a special, like is there a certain color for the card if you're there on a music osmosis trip where you can get like a 90-day extension if you're still learning from Jarlath Henderson or something like that?
God, I wish, and God, who knows what they would have done if I could have just kept on, renewing things over and over. But no, I was there I was on a 2-year student visa. I was. So that time was running out, and I thought, of course, the government had changed things to where I thought I would be able to extend it, but found out about 6 months in advance that I wouldn't be able to. There went my plans of staying over there and never coming back to America. Right. So I was looking at having to move back over here and trying to figure out where to live and what to do. and again made the kind of sort of logical leap that only a man in his early 20s could, which is to say, like, well, I would like to play music full time, but I know it's awfully tough getting going. The gigs can be few and far between. It's hard to get stuff started. Surely I'll need some sort of day job to kind of, fill in the gaps when I'm not on the road playing to my adoring public. So obviously, pipe making is a steady bet. That's a solid enough day job. Surely someone will. Surely there's someone who will give me an apprenticeship. And teach me how to make the instrument, and of course, pay me while doing so. As of course I deserve.
Well, and of course,
myself being
pipe
24,
makers have so much money
right.
already that they could definitely take on a paid apprentice.
Yeah. So hunted around, definitely wanted to. Would have loved to be able to move to Ireland and work for an apprentice or have an apprenticeship there. Emailed some pipe makers. Stunningly, did not hear back from any of them. But I reached out to Nate Banton, who was living in New York City at the time. Nate's wife is from New York. She's from Rockaway, and they were living down there. Nate had a workshop in Williamsburg, East Williamsburg, and in Brooklyn. And Nate, God bless him, I'll never know why he did it. Agreed to take me on as an apprentice, and was even willing to pay me after I put in just a little bit of time. We basically started paying me as soon as I actually was able to do anything in the shop. Just after a couple of months, really. Which was still incredibly generous of him, and I still owe him a ton for that.
There is something to be said for just doing stuff before you're old enough to realize how crazy it is.
Yeah, absolutely, and how much you're asking of people,
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think that's applicable to a lot of things, including things like having kids, in all honesty.
Right. Yeah, right.
This is on my mind right now because my wife and I are about to have yet another kid, but we look back at our own, when our first child was born, which is over a decade ago now, and it terrifies us in a sort of retroactive way, because we now know how ignorant and foolish we were 10 years ago. We couldn't take care of a baby 10 years ago. What were we doing having babies? It's a miracle that the baby survived this long. So
yeah, the beauty of being of that age, and just kind of the confidence to just say, this will all be fine.
Right, I'm just going to do it. It'll be fine.
Yeah. And a lot of the time it works out, right?
Yeah, totally.
Which maybe says something for trying to hang on to an element of that confidence,
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, I suppose there's also, if you're 23 or 24, there's a willingness to suffer, and a capability maybe to suffer in ways that you maybe grow less tolerant of as you get older and softer.
There is some kind of trope about hitting your early to mid 30s. That's when you start to want nice stuff.
Yeah.
Right. You just want to be comfortable. You're tired of it.
Exactly.
I'm feeling that big time. Man.
when I was working with Nate, I was living with how many other guys were in that Brooklyn apartment? I was living with two other guys, basically in a shoebox, just to make things work rent wise. And geez, I didn't mind it at the time, but I surely would now.
Right.
Yeah. So I got started with Nate, and was still working on. Obviously, was working on making Nate. Fairly quickly had me kind of focusing on border pipes side of the business. And at the same time, I was going out in New York playing a bunch of sessions, just playing flute, mind you. I wouldn't have brought border pipes to sessions in New York. I always kind of kept the two things separate. I think I was interested in that specific Donegal repertoire as it would fit on the border pipes, but that was about it. I at that point I knew better than to be trying to play Scottish pipes in an Irish session, particularly in New York City. And so I was playing flute out there, and just getting to know people. That's where I first met Kate, and Nate, when he first hired me on, said that he would be in New York for, half a decade or so, but mine, cause I was part of the appeal, again, me thinking that I had any room to negotiate at all,
Yeah.
Part of the appeal was like, oh man, he's a pipe maker and he's in New York City. I can have my cake and eat it too, man. I can learn how to make pipes. I can, make pipes during the day, play sessions at night. World's my oyster.
That's when you go marching in and say, you are an okay fit for me. I'll take it.
Exactly. And Nate was like, well, okay, that sounds great, but just so you know, we are eventually going to leave the city. We're planning, Nate had just gotten married. He was like, we are planning on having kids, and we want to raise the kids outside of the city. We're probably going to move to Maine. Just so you know, I'm not going to be here forever. And I was like, Nate, that sounds great. He's like, it'll probably be I'll be here for 4 or 5 more years. And I was like, that sounds good. Man, I can get everything done in 5 years.
Yeah,
no
I'll be an old man by then. No problem.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, and I think I'd been in Nate's shop for about 6 months when he announced to me that his wife was pregnant and they were probably going to be leaving in a year. So, that sent, my plans of, New York City glory, obviously, a little bit off course, but I knew at that point I was smart enough to know that I had a good thing going for me working for him. And decided to, it was just Portland he was moving to. We're less than 2 hours, up the road from Boston. There's a direct train route and all that. So, Boston, of course, being another great city for traditional Irish music. So I figured I ought to kind of take my best bet. And at that time, I had decided that, I was, far too much of God's gift to the world to, do something like, work in coffee or something like that.
Right. Can't be wasting your talents.
Exactly. Took my 2-year chip, with New York and, cashed it in and, moved up to Portland, where I've been ever since.
Yeah.
Moved out of New York in the middle of a snowstorm in Brooklyn in February. It was moving a giant South Bend 13-inch swing lathe. The thing weighed 2,000 pounds. Oh, geez. Getting that out of a Brooklyn warehouse onto a truck and up to Maine. I don't think I'll ever recover from that.
It's like from now on, anytime you set up shop, it'll be where there's a lathe already positioned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Was working with Nate, making border pipes all that time. It wasn't until I moved up to Portland, and met my friend Kieran O'Hare, that I actually got onto the uilleann pipes.
Yeah.
Kieran met me and was, again, another guy who was just incredibly kind and generous to me, probably really before I deserved it. And Kieran was very encouraging of my efforts musically. He was particularly encouraging of my efforts on the flute. And so, at that point, I was still on that track of, I'd be in my mid-20s now. I was still on that track of basically doing everything but playing uilleann pipes, because I was so attached to the fact that I'd put all this time in on the Scottish pipes chanter. And in fairness, now was genuinely interested in some of the musical stuff that had to do with taking tunes from the Donegal fiddle tradition and putting them on the pipes, on the Scottish pipes. And Nate and I were up to all that nutty stuff we were doing at the time in terms of tacking on extra drones and the low drone and that kind of thing.
I don't feel like any set of small pipes should have fewer than 5 drones on it. After having watched enough of those videos. And if you're going to go contra bass, I like having that little piccolo drone sticking out the side as well, Give me a whistle. I want a whistle.
Yeah. We really got up to some stuff. But no, Kieran's a great uilleann piper, world-class uilleann piper, really.
Yeah.
And he was just like, right. He just kept on looking at me and just being like, right. So you are going to start playing uilleann pipes. It's just a matter of time. And really just, he just Kieran's like one of those uilleann pipers who's got a set of pipes and a couple of different pitches, just bits and pieces knocking around. And just eventually, all I had to do was ask, and he gave me the loan of a set. I think I was 26. I think I was, and that was it. I knew that it was.
There was no going back.
There was no going back. I knew, and I think I put it off for as long as I did because I knew that really would be the end of me. And it was. And I think I probably put it off because I was worried. I had notions about worrying about making a living and that kind of thing.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, that's basically the story. Like I managed to put off getting onto the uilleann pipes until I was in my mid-20s, and then once I was, that was it. It was a great. Obviously, I kept working with Nate. Nate and I remained good friends. Kate and I bought a house a year and a half ago, and we're less than half a mile from Nate and his shop. But I have my own shop now that I'm making uilleann pipes out of. He and I are kind of no longer business partners, but under the best of terms. Like simply, like he has his shop and I have mine, and he makes small pipes up there, and I make. Is there any
like highly specific like running to the neighbor to borrow a cup of sugar things, but that are like so specific to this niche thing that you both do, where like, oh no, I need I don't even know what the terminology would be, but I'm delighting in the potential for like a Steve Martin style joke where it's like, I need my 1/2x7 2-inch sprocket flange and that kind of thing.
Absolutely,
that's great.
It's like, hey Nate, my 1/4-inch gun drill is only 14 inches long, and I have this weird job came in, and I need an 18-inch 1/4-inch gun drill for this one. Do you have one handy? And he's like, yeah, I do.
That's so awesome.
And he might ask me for the same. We're probably Kieran O'Hara's pointed this out. Like, I don't know if there's any place in the world aside from Portland where there's 2 pipe makers operating within a mile radius of each
close
other.
together. Yeah. And on such great terms as well.
Yeah.
It's just awesome. Mm-hmm. Now the speaking of the uilleann pipes, I thought maybe we could pull in another track from the Glory Reel, track 3. this unintentional theme has developed of me asking you to define things for me, Will, clarify terms. Repeal of the Union and Scotsmen over the border. It feels appropriate because we're talking about border pipes and uilleann pipes. And I, again, hear union pipes sometimes. And I'm pretty sure that refers to uilleann pipes, but I realize, like, right now I'm realizing, like, I'm actually not 100% sure that that's it. That's the case, right? That's uilleann pipes?
Yes, the union pipes are the uilleann pipes. The term uilleann, which is just the Irish word for elbow, or so I'm told, anyways, is my understanding of it is that it is a label that got stuck on the instrument not until the 20th century, anyways.
Oh.
It was a word that comes out of the Gaelic revival in Ireland.
I see.
And prior to that, the first, we see them most commonly being referred to in Ireland prior to the famine, which the famine was devastating to pipe makers and pipers in Ireland. Most of the pipe makers and pipers in Ireland, if they survived the famine at all, escaped to America. The majority of them, anyways. But prior to the famine, is really like this golden era of pipe making and piping in Ireland. And in all of the literature that survives, the instrument is referred to as the union pipes.
I see.
There's no real clear reason that they're referred to as the union pipes. Some people think that the term refers to as the musical union between chanter, drones, and regulators.
Oh, I see.
After that, they in America, in Irish America, where the concert pitch pipes were invented by the Taylor brothers in the 1860s, they're universally referred to as the Irish pipes or the Irish bagpipes. They're not called the uilleann pipes, and they're not really called the union pipes either. They're just called the Irish pipes, which is still how I mostly introduce them to people when they ask me what the hell I'm playing.
Right.
And then, the uilleann pipes come in the 1920s, or maybe a bit before then. I think maybe the 1890s. I'm not sure. But yeah, so the union pipes refer to the same instrument. In modern parlance, they often refer to flat pitched instruments with a narrow bore that are copies of pre-famine instruments made in Ireland.
Oh, so if I had a so let me see if I can get this straight. So a concert pitch set of uilleann pipes, concert pitch meaning typically D, right?
D, yeah.
So I could call those uilleann pipes or Irish pipes or concert pitch pipes. If I was talking with people who actually played though, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get myself a set of B flat, maybe even C uilleann pipes, I would maybe then say union pipes.
You would probably, in actual practice, you would probably just, in actual practice, you would probably just say pipes because you were talking to other uilleann pipers who know who you're talking about. Taking a step back from that, it's still like, we're talking about a modern tradition. So you would probably just say uilleann pipes.
Right.
But if you see the term used at all, it would be by people being highly specific about what specific, organological tradition they're referencing.
That's fun.
It's just extremely nerdy stuff,
which is why we're here.
Yeah. I can think of Bill Hanneman, who's he's American, but living in Ireland, been in Ireland for decades now. He's a great pipe maker, a great maker of uilleann pipes. I believe Bill, titles himself as a maker of union and uilleann pipes.
I see.
Which does make sense, I don't think Bill would walk around calling himself that, but on his website or whatever. which I think is just points to the fact that even when we're talking about uilleann piping, or the Irish piping tradition, we're referencing these specific, different piping traditions within that kind of broader tent,
It's interesting. Like I would have imagined the union piping name being sort of the newer one, just because I uilleann, Irish language feels pre-Anglo, right? And so it feels like it's got to be older. And I had heard something. I think it's like something like the Algonquin word for the animal that I call a woodchuck in English. Mm-hmm. Like that word just sounds kind of like woodchuck, and that's so like of course these creatures don't actually chuck wood. It just kind of sounds that way. And so I had kind of imagined like, oh, some English speaker couldn't pronounce uilleann pipes, and it sounds kind of like union pipes, and so then people started calling them union pipes. So I would have had the timeline flipped around if I was guessing at where these different terms were coming in. But,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a funny point there too, right? Because it's you have to think about, like, I think like the uilleann pipes and the union pipes absolutely are a Irish cultural product and a instrument native to Ireland. But you also have to think about, in the era we're talking about, the going from the 1790s to the 1840s. You think about the amount of work that goes into a set of uilleann pipes today, right?
Yeah.
And then think again about doing the same job, but at a time when things like ebony, ivory, even brass.
I just heard a Paul McCartney song going through my head.
Brass, nickel, silver, all the supplies that go into the instrument are that much more dear, that much more expensive, and harder to get. And all of this is being done without electrical power.
Oh, yeah, it's true. You think about how fast a lathe can spin something, right?
Yeah, and without
with your foot.
Exactly, without the aid of modern machining. Yeah. And like, think about it's 1820. You're in Ireland. Think about the cost of a lathe.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So these instruments were not being made for your local country piper to play for the dance at the crossroads. These instruments were being made for the aristocracy.
That's interesting. Do you happen to listen to the Way Too Twags Bagpipe History podcast?
I know. I've seen it advertised, but I've never actually listened to it myself.
It's super fun. It's super fun, and he's been kind of trying to suss out lately a clarification for what people are talking about in these old manuscripts when they refer to a gentleman piper. Mm-hmm. Whether it is a gentleman, i.e. a person of means, right, who plays pipes, because then they could afford such a set of pipes, right?
Yeah.
Or is it more like a gentleman's gentleman, right, where a piper who is, hired by a gentleman, and in that case, then still the gentleman would be the person of means who could afford a set of pipes, So one way or the other, I see what you're saying. It would be only the people with money who would have these instruments made.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are a lot of stories of, it wouldn't just be the landlords themselves playing the pipes. A lot of the time they would basically patronize a local musician who had already proven themselves to be capable on whatever, the flute or the fiddle.
Yeah.
And then gift them or loan them a set of pipes. Sometimes because they wanted them to be, their own, basically, kind of resident or semi-resident musician. Sometimes because the musician in question was, there's a lot of stories of blind children being educated in music in Ireland, simply because it was a way for them to make a living, where otherwise they might not have been able to. So sometimes I think it was almost considered an act of charity, to kind of give someone a set of pipes. But it's obviously I don't think it's as clean cut is that either.
Sure. Whatever is anything you look at it long enough, it gets kind of gray and fuzzy, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's very important to note that the musicians who fled to America after the famine, during the famine, were not. It wasn't the people with money and land who came over here. It was working Irish people, and there was obviously a huge appetite for piping amongst amongst immigrants over here, and already there were pipers amongst them too. So I think probably the detail has been, some of the detail's been lost to time, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, that would make sense. So maybe though, I guess so now I've got, I feel very cautious about saying this. I'm just going to go for it and feel free to, and feel I am completely confident letting everybody know how ignorant I am of things. But now that I've mentioned my buddy Jeremy, he loves Jackson. And now I'm like, wait, which Jackson is it? Is it, cause now all I can think of is Jackson Pollock, but I know that's not right. Walker Jackson? Does that sound like Walker
Jackson? I think is the name.
Because you've got another track on this album, Patty on the Turnpike and Jackson's, and you just left it at Jackson's. Yeah. And I thought that was funny because Jeremy, he put out an album, I think it was his album called Bannocks of Barley Meal. It might have been one of the previous ones though, where he had so many tunes, like so many, that were Jackson's walking stick, Jackson's pet dog, Jackson's walking, like just everything belongs to Jackson, And I wondered, was that the reason why the title you gave to this set, it ends with Jackson's with a possessive S? Is there multiple Jackson tunes in the mix there?
There are loads of Jackson's tunes. And the ones I think that your man there is playing, would probably, the majority of them have to do with it. Yeah, that Walker Jackson, who was that gentleman piper who so many tunes are associated with.
And he has mentioned that, like, he maybe didn't write all of them. This might be kind of like a Psalms situation where you have a lot of work being attributed to an almost mythical figure in a way.
Yeah, or just tunes kind of, a lot of his tunes are awfully samey. And it might just be a story of kind of, a few tunes at the trunk of the tree gradually metamorphosizing into slightly different versions of themselves.
Awfully samey. I like putting it.
and getting different names stuck on them over the generations.
That makes sense.
That track in question though is actually Kate's fiddle solo. Those tunes come from the playing of a fiddler named James Morrison, who was coming over here. He was from Sligo, but was recording in America in the 20s. And that specific Sligo fiddle repertoire has a few, not a lot, but I think a couple tunes in it that are called Jacksons. And I would be hard-pressed to say, those tunes are very different than the tunes that get associated with the Jackson and the piping tradition. It could be anything, a lot of the tunes in that tradition, that fiddle tradition I'm talking about, and that specific kind of like little Sligo repertoire, not little, but in that Sligo repertoire from the specific locality of these musicians in question that came to America and recorded in the 20s. A lot of those tunes were that have someone's name on them, someone's last name on them, are often have to do with a dancing master or kind of traveling fiddle teacher who was transmitting these tunes to musicians around then.
Well, that makes sense. This album is so dancey. In fact, there's another track on there. It opens with something I couldn't pronounce, but it's got the Girls of Ardara and the Back Door in it.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first one where I was like, wait a second, this is not a bowron. Those are not drums.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then I saw the featuring Jackie O'Reilly thing. I was like, well, who the heck is Jackie O'Reilly? Maybe that's the percussionist, right? I look her up. Yeah. No, that's dancing. You've got dancing on the album. Yeah. And then I realized, there have been other tracks that I've already listened to earlier in the album that also feature dancing. That's so cool. I am not a dancer, man. I'm so not a dancer, and it's funny to me that I've spent so many years playing jigs and reels and Strathspeys and stuff, and like I've never danced a jig or a reel or a hornpipe, Do you ever dance, or how does dancing inform? Like this album is so dancey, So like,
I'm no dancer. I'm no dancer at all. Kate was a dancer. She did Irish step dancing when she was a little kid.
Has she ever done that thing where fiddlers play and dance at the same time?
God, no.
That blows my mind.
I mean, fair play to them. I don't know how
crazy.
They do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it, but I don't think I'd be asking her to do that now.
And don't get me wrong, her playing's amazing all by itself. So I'm not saying that she's not impressive if she's not also dancing at the same time, right?
I'll have to ask her sometime. I'll take a photo of her facial reaction and send it to
there you
go. I don't think she'll be too pleased.
But she's done dance at some point.
Yeah. When she was a kid, and then she kind of she was playing fiddle at the same time, and then decided to go with the fiddle rather than dancing. She has that in her. No, I'm not. I'm no dancer. I've never been a dancer. But I have spent a lot of time playing for dancers, for fiddle dancers and set dancers, as well as for Sean-Nós dancers, the sort of dance that Jackie is so accomplished at and teaches down in Boston. I don't dance at all myself, but have been very lucky to be able to play for great dancers over the years, particularly since I moved up here. There's a great dancing scene down in Boston. So,
gotcha.
And I think that definitely that informs both specifically the kind of stuff that Kate and I are into. All of those dancers were playing for, all those musicians that we listened to were playing for dancers, 5 nights a week in New York City. Like they were just, they were playing for dancers all the time. And that's absolutely in their music, even when the music they're playing is not strictly at dance rhythms or dance tempos. Just that drive is there.
Yeah, I feel like that percussive style of flute playing you do really fits well with the idea of dancing to the music.
It's absolutely about putting the beat under the dancer's feet. Yeah. It's one of my favorite things to do. Like if I could do that a couple nights a week, like play for good dancers, I'd be a happy man.
No, now what about though? Do you have any like just off the wall, like either like secret genres or instruments that you either do play or dream of playing? Like let's say it's like non-trad. You know, like are you like a closet slap bass virtuoso and none of us know it? You know, or do you dream of like being able to bang out a melody on steel drum or something like that?
It's a great question, and no, I'm so unimaginative in that way, I suppose.
You've found your niche and your.
It's honestly, I find it. I think, and Kate and I talk about this sometimes because she's the same way. Like like around the house, well, she's like, I will put on some music, whatever, just hanging out around the house. Like, hey, what do we listen to? And it's not a question of like what kind. It's always going to be traditional Irish music. At best, it's a discussion between like, well, will we listen to like some scratchy old digitized 78s, or will we listen to like some tape someone made of Andy McGann playing in a pub in the 1970s, or like, are we really gonna let our hair down today and actually listen to a modern album, like a album of modern traditional Irish music? Like,
right,
I don't even mean,
but modern doesn't mean like you're listening to like the Gorillas or something, right?
No. I don't even mean like I don't even mean like
Billboard Top 40 or something.
I'm not even talking about Lunasa, man. When I say modern, I just mean like a pure drop album that was like recorded last year. You know what I mean? Like we're very
is too far out there.
We're very stayed in that way, and both of us have been for most of our lives. So
to some degree, that's got to be like you've got to be soaking in it to be able to produce it. I would imagine. This album wouldn't sound the way it does if you weren't so completely, perfectly, beautifully percolating in the tradition already.
I think so, and I think it's also an overlooked thing, and I'm just now starting to wonder how this is going to change the climate of traditional Irish music in the next few decades. The internet, for all of its ills, has made the sharing of music very, very easy. And one thing specifically that it's done for terrible, awful nerds like Kate and myself is it's made digitized recordings from a century plus widely available in a way that they simply were not even 20 years ago, even a decade ago. This stuff was really only starting to become accessible. And when you think about, so like I am a huge man. I'm somewhat rare in like I will just pop in the car if I'm driving around town or whatever and pop on recordings, literally digitized from wax cylinders, recordings of Patsy Toohey, the great Irish American piper, a stellar musician, and the recordings sound like they were made on wax cylinder. It's hissing and popping and thumping, but great piping contained amongst all of that. And I will just drive around listening to that in the car. And we're talking about recordings that were made by Patsy Toohey in his New York City basement on a little machine about the size of a phone booth.
I'd been imagining that it was from a hall, so from a concert hall or something that he'd given.
No, he made a few commercial 78s, but he died in 22 too. He did, so he actually predated the commercial 78 era as far as it was interested in Irish music, anyways.
Yeah.
So most of his stuff, Toohey had this great racket where he advertised in all the Irish American newspapers, saying that he would send he had a catalog of tunes you could request. And if it was $1 per tune. This is, 19 teens, money, so not cheap. And, you could, mail him send him the money and what tunes you were requesting. And in the mail, you would receive, wax cylinders of the tunes in question that he had recorded on a wax cylinder recording machine that he bought and owned and apparently was stationed in his house. And he recorded a bunch of these, and they were in circulation, but there weren't many of them. And a few other people recorded him too. There were Chief O'Neill in Chicago. And so there's these handful of cylinders that survived. And they were, but you have to imagine, it's a wax cylinder. It's a physical object.
Yeah.
That then a few of them were, and by a few, actually, it seems like 40 of these things actually survived, wound up in the hands of people who knew what they were, wanted to preserve them. But for decades, like you couldn't hear them at all. And then for another few decades, there was one man in New York City, or in Long Island, he wound up on, named Tom Busby, a piper himself, and a great admirer of Toohey, who had a number of Toohey's cylinders. And he recorded them onto tapes, and the tapes floated around. And people would make copies of the tapes and copies of the tapes. And it's thanks to Tom Busby that a lot of this stuff actually survives. So much of the Toohey that I listen to is from these tapes that Busby made. So I'm listening to digitized copies of a tape of a wax cylinder.
Yeah.
But just the fact that these were preserved at all is like an incredible cultural accomplishment. And we're just now getting into a place where, everyone who's so desires, at least, who is of this particular streak, can actually study these recordings and incorporate these lost tunes, this lost repertoire, this lost technique, this lost rhythm into their own playing. And we're in that place really for the first time since Toohey himself was walking the earth.
That is pretty exciting.
Yeah, so I think that's really what's informing a lot of the stuff that Kate and I are doing. Just the access to this. I still think that these musicians, like from that era, like they were playing at a time where there was massive popular interest in what they were doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were full-time musicians. And they were doing stuff on their instruments that modern Irish musicians still have not for the most part, a few of them can, but for the most part still have not figured out how to accomplish. Yeah. Or at least to accomplish at the same tempos with the same drive and lift and that kind of thing, Sorry, I went off on a tear there.
No, that's great. That's the good stuff, man.
Yeah.
I know that, of course, there's this album, excuse me, the Glory Reel, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes, as well as that EP from Daymark, too, because I thought that was so excellent. And then, just a quick plug for anybody interested in these kinds of like archival resources, audio as well as like transcripts that you could look at and stuff like that. My buddy Jeremy knows it way better than I do, but obviously Will has dug into this stuff, and if anybody is like interested in doing that, feel free to email the show, and I'll bug Will about it. I'll reach out to you, Will, as long as you don't mind. I'll be like, hey, man, where do you go to find those?
No, I'm happy to help. I mean, for people who are looking to get started, what is it now? The Irish Traditional Music Archive in Dublin. It's itma.ie. Is a great place to start. They actually have a load of stuff digitized and just available to listen to on their website for people looking to get a taste of these musicians that I've been talking about.
Well, let me just give you a fair warning, Will. Like, based off of everything that you've just, especially in the last few minutes, what you've been talking about and the passion that you have about it. Fair warning: if you do start delving into the back catalog of Jeremy's recordings, his investigative work with these archival resources on that Way Two Twags Bagpipe and History podcast, I wonder if you'll listen to quite as many wax cylinder recordings, because you might be so enthralled. It sounds to me like it's right up your alley, is what I'm saying.
I'll have to check it out. I'll have to check it out for sure.
Now, I also know that I know I've heard some tracks from you on like Lowland and Border Pipe Society compilation albums and stuff like that. Aside from like the Glory Reel and this EP from Daymark and where I could find you on YouTube and stuff, do you have any other sort of like media stuff you'd like to point people toward, or things that are in the works that we should be looking forward to?
That's it for now. Like a lot of those recordings on YouTube came out of a project that Kate and I did during the pandemic, which was called the Phonograph Project, which was us essentially covering 70. We're at an interesting moment in time in that the 1920s are, exactly a century ago.
Right.
So we were basically, studying and re-recording our takes on 78s, on 78 sides, on tracks that were made in the same year. So 1921, 1922, we put up a bunch of 78s of great Irish music that were recorded a century prior, and all that stuff's up on YouTube now. There was a Patreon that we were doing for a while, and it was great fun during the pandemic, and we had a great bunch of supporters. And then real life started happening again, and we actually started playing out again, and there just wasn't time for the work. So yeah, the Glory Reel that came out in 2019. That's an album we're very proud of. The Phonograph Project was our next major output, and that was during the pandemic, and we're very proud of that stuff too, but it really does just live on YouTube at that point. Kate and I are starting work on our next album.
Nice. That's what I was hoping to hear.
Yeah. We're really overdue. And we're wanting to get it out soon. But before that happens, as far as my own pipe making is concerned, I'm just making uilleann pipes now. And I'm making half sets. I've got chanters that I'm happy with. I've got drones that I'm happy with. And I'm playing on a chanter and drones that I made myself. But I'm playing on a borrowed set of regulators. And I absolutely refuse to record an album until I'm playing on a full set that I made myself. So, which is a bit of a roadblock, or a bit of a speed bump, anyways.
Right? Yeah. Speed bump.
So, like, she and I could sit down and record an album tomorrow and be happy with it, except for the fact that I do need to get my regulator design dialed in.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to have my regulators sorted out. I've been working on them. I've been working on them. So I'm hoping to have my regs sorted out in the next 6 or 8 months or so. And as soon as that's done and I'm used to them and happy with how they're going, I'd say she and I will be going hammer and tongs on our new album. So with any luck, we'll have an album out by the end of 2024. Well,
I'll have links to where people can find all that kind of stuff in the show notes, and then come come the next album, you can just plan on me bugging you again and asking you on to talk about it, and we'll do some samples and stuff like that if that works for you. I'd love to.
Oh God, yeah, no, I'd
love
be
to
thrilled.
explore
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, there'll be more. Yeah.
No, that's
more,
what I was going to ask you. More of the.
Yeah, more of the last album was a bit of an interesting one in that it was this kind of hybridization of the Irish American repertoire and a lot of the repertoire that Kate grew up with more sort of stuff from Donegal, which is a bit of an odd combo. A lot of people from Donegal actually, and from the North in general, immigrated to Philadelphia specifically. There used to be an old ocean line between I think it was Derry and Philly. So there is a bit of a northern influence there, which is part of why the album is the way it is. But I expect the next album will be more representative of just kind of the full Irish American thing that Kate and I are really up to these days, and loads of stuff from the 20s and 30s. And probably, I expect it'll probably be a little bit heavier on. I expect it'll be an unaccompanied pipes and fiddle album for the most part, with of course some flute playing in the mix as well. But probably mostly pipes and fiddle.
Oh, it's gonna be awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. And what do you think? I was trying to decide if we would go out on the last track of the Glory Reel, which is the Jolly Tinker and the Wind that Shakes the Barley, or something else. Like, could be something from Daymark or something from your YouTube video